Oliver, thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me just put it down.
You want the
Yep.
stand?
That'd be easier. Well, thank you, Rachel. First of all, for the invitation. I'm very honored to be invited to Creative Mornings, and thank you very much for the super kind words. You said a lot of things that I planned to say already. But yeah, and thanks to you guys for turning out in such a great number. That's really impressive. Seems that the tradition of beer always works in Germany. If you shout out beer, everybody comes around. So yes, you might have seen I brought some actually. So feel free to either crack one open now. It's you'll be surprised. It's a non-alcoholic beer, or take one home. But yeah, go ahead. I'll talk about that beer in a while. But just to give you a brief introduction about myself, I'm 45 years old now. I'm in brewing since I think 26 years. I started out here in Hamburg in a brew pub that still exists, Gröninger, after actually having a students exchange with Canadian college students, and because they were so into German beer when they were here, and for me it was natural, it was there. I didn't think much about it, but that basically started me thinking about, hey, well, why not? I'd like to go to Canada. Why not brew German beer for them in Canada? I never actively brewed beer in Canada. However, my career took me quite around the world. So after that first job here in the brew pub, I studied brewing science in Berlin. So I have a master's in brewing. And after a short stop in the German brewing industry, coincidence swept me into the Caribbean for the first time, brewing there. And I spent by now, I think, around 7 years in the Caribbean and Central Northern America in the brewing industry, which is quite interesting because for me it's what I like most is to explore, to break boundaries, to learn new things, meet new people, get to know different views. That's what's inspiring. And in this trip through different countries and different beer scenes, what inspired me the most after that initial inspiration from the Canadians in German beer, very traditional German beer, because back then in, when was that, 91 or so, the German beer scene was pretty, undiverse. You have your Pilsner, you have your Hefeweizen, maybe an export, that's it. So in 2009, I started working for actually a brew house manufacturer, not active in brewing, but I started as their technical sales manager for North America and the Caribbean in that shitty town of Miami. And so I was actually getting paid to travel the US craft beer scene. And after you had your sales call, you would sit down with the brewmasters in the evening, and I would at least try all their beers. And that was for me that I would say that's when I saw the light again, because I had the beers and I was like, yeah, you can really actually inspire people. You can make people happy with beer. It's not just about getting shit-faced. Sorry. So, of course, as a brewer, you always want to start your own brewery. So that started working in me. And in 2011, different situations changed, and I sat down with my wife. I watched the German beer scene closely, and around 2011, I saw like the first signs of craft beer coming up in Germany, and thought, okay, it might be now or never. So either we're going to move back now to our hometown and give it a shot, or we just leave it. And my wife gladly said, yeah, let's do that. So yeah, we moved back, started our own brewery, Wieder Kreativbrauerei. Well, back then, it was the first challenge that we had to overcome. We came back to Germany into a traditional beer country, right? Beer is like, Germans define themselves by their cars and their beer. So I spoke to colleagues of mine and told them about my idea, my inspirations I got from The US craft beer market is like, yeah, I'm going to come into the market and going to brew awesome beers and get people excited. And like, oh, you're not going to brew a Pilsner? That's not going to work. I was like, no, why would I brew a Pilsner? That's one of the main things. People think you need a Pilsner beer for a brewery, or especially in northern Germany. In southern Germany, it might be a Helles, but yeah. I said, no, why would I? I mean, there are some decent beers out there on the market. I don't have to reinvent it. Plus, the prices are just crap. You cannot survive as a small company, and why would I do something that others have been doing and pretty okay so far? So we basically sat down, and my first real inspiration in brewing for our beers was a beer that I still admire a lot, or a brewery that I admire a lot in the US. That's Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. I'm not sure how many are familiar with that. It's a really outstanding company, a really outstanding philosophy behind it. I think it's the first LEED Platinum certified brewery in the whole world, I guess. So they're doing a lot of environmental work, waste reduction, and besides that, great beers. They started the US craft beer scene, or were part of the start of the US craft beer movement in 1980. And what inspired Ken Grossman, the founder back then, was the beer scene in Europe. It's not only Germany, there's more than to beer in Europe. That's at least Belgium and the UK. So most of the craft beer brewers in the US were in Europe and tried beers, and back then in the 1980s there were like 79 breweries in the whole of the United States left. By now it's over 7,000. It's not even 40 years. And all of these breweries made this typical light American lager, Budweiser, Miller Coors, that stuff that everybody typically associates with US beers. So what he did back then was he brewed basically a British-style pale ale, but as a small startup brewer, he had to use the raw materials that were available in the US. So he had to use US hops, and it was hard to get your hands on hops. So he was using the only hop variety he would get his hands on was Cascade, a variety that was back then being used by some of the bigger breweries, but not so sought after these days. Cascade has the nice effect that you really get a fruity touch. It gives you that touch of grapefruit peel into your beer, just the hops. You don't have to put fruit in there, actually. And so he struck this nice balance in a beer that it has perfect drinkability. You can drink this beer as what they call a lawnmower beer. You can just basically you have been working in your yard, you come inside, you just crack the bottle open and just chug it down. And it's going to be refreshing. It's not overpowering you. At the same time, if you want to savor a beer, if you really want to drink something with flavor, it still gives you enough to experience. So that was my inspiration. However, when we started in 2011, 2012, there were probably not even 10 colleagues in the whole of Germany that were doing experiments in craft beer. However, all of them had an IPA as their flagship beer style. Does everybody know what an IPA is? Just out of curiosity? Cool. All right. So I don't have to go there. And yes, I'm a hophead. I like IPAs, and we do have IPAs. So that's a non-alcoholic IPA. But I didn't want to start in the market and say, hey, we're the next one, and we have an IPA. So I took this inspiration and said, okay, let's take something traditional German and just pump it up. So our first beer, back then I didn't find a location yet. I went to a friend of mine who was the brewmaster at a Danish brewery, where the craft beer scene started much earlier. You have small breweries that are also able to package in Germany. Typically you have small breweries that are pub breweries, but then they cannot package, or the packaging breweries are just too big. They would have, I don't know, I would have produced a year's supply of beer in one go. So we basically brewed this beer as a prototype, and we presented that to friends and some shop owners that were into beer specialties in Hamburg in our garage, literally in our garage. And the initial idea was to present the beer and say, okay, look, this is our approach to what we can do. How do you like it? How shall we tweak it? So back then, this first batch was called Prototyp. The response was so overwhelming that we said, oh, okay, so well, we just leave it as it is. Cool. So since then, the beer is called Prototyp. Kept the name. For the longest time, it was our flagship, still our second flagship brand. And yes, it's basically, it's a, sometimes I just call it a pills on steroids. So what we did is take a traditional Helles lager from Germany and pump it up a little bit more alcohol, 5.9, and dry hop it. So dry hopping is an old technique that actually was extinct over the longest period of time. Back then, it was used to stabilize beer because hops, apart from the flavor and the bittering component, has the ability to stop the growth of lactic acid bacteria. So that is one of the main beer spoiling bacteria, so the beer turns sour. So back in the days, people have been putting hops directly into the barrel to just stop it from getting spoiled. As a side effect, they noticed, hey, I'm adding flavor to the beer. And depending on the hop variety, that's a huge playing field that you can work on. There are over 200 hop varieties that actually are dependent on terroir as well. So a German Cascade tastes different to an American Cascade. It's great playing field. So we added some hops to the on the cold side after fermentation, and all of a sudden you have a lager that has passion fruit, lychee aroma with it. I know that during the first tastings, people were like, "Oh, you put some fruit in there." It's like, no, that's just from the hops. Again, tradition Germans think they own it, and they invented the beer, and that the Reinheitsgebot is the last thing that has to exist in the world. Actually, this is all bullshit because beer, the first traces of beer were found in the area of the Sumerians about 8,000 years ago. The last 200, well, let's say 500 years, were the center of beer development was in Central Europe. That's right. I don't even start on the Reinheitsgebot. I just want to say it's all bullshit what they're telling you. And especially what the current situation is today is not what they make you believe. So they're selling tradition. It's the image of tradition, but it's not really true. Whoever wants has the time afterwards, we can chat about that. Otherwise, I could blow the time frame by far right now. But anyways, starting back then, it was interesting. So we had our first beer. We had the Prototyp. We started brewing it, and that's really. It turned out it was exactly that entry-level beer. It's about getting people to slowly take them by the hand and to introduce them what craft beer is about, what beer can be about. If you give a German beer drinker an IPA, by now we do have a single hop IPA series that has 7.5% alcohol and is technically twice as bitter as the Jefer. So that would probably blow the mind of most of the people if you tell them, hey, something new, got to try it. Like, are you crazy? So that took many people by the hand and introduced them into the flavors that beer can have. The next challenges we had to overcome were actually in 2012, as I said, the German beer market was dominated. 80% of the German beer market was dominated by 4 beer styles. There was Pils, Helles, Hefeweizen, and Export. And the remaining 20% were niche beer styles like alt beer, Kölsch, stuff like that, but only mainly contained to the areas. At the same time, I'm a judge at the World Beer Cup, so kind of the Olympics of beer. There we're judging 99 different beer styles. And the beer style guideline has over 150 beer styles, so that's just an idea of how many beer styles are out there beyond the reach of the German beer tradition. Starting something in 2012 and going to a bank and telling them, hey, look, I got this awesome business plan. I'm going to start up a brewery in Germany. Would have probably been kind of a waste of time because back then breweries would be closing. The beer market was in decline, and beer market prices are just rock bottom. Probably one of the cheapest countries to buy beer in the whole world. So I had to take all my savings that I had until then, which was just shy of 30,000 euros, and start something with that. Well, if you go to a manufacturer and tell them, okay, I need one piece of brewery, you probably have to apply factor 20 at least, because we work with a lot of stainless steel stuff that's dirt expensive. Question was, how can we get that started? Either you continue brewing at other places, but that is a lot of traveling around, and you don't have your anchor point. People have to come to the brewery. They have to explore that. So I basically remembered what I was studying back then, and started to build my own equipment. I used old dairy tanks. Got a friend who welded frame underneath it. That's what we're still working with. It's pretty labor intensive. It's kind of sometimes a pain in the ass, but it does the trick, and it was affordable. That's how we started. Also breaking into the German beer market, we had the challenge in how to get the beer out there. Well, most of you know the traditional beer crates that you can see sitting there in the back, beer or juice or whatever. Challenge is, these crates have a standard deposit rate of €1.50 without the bottles. If you purchase a crate, you pay around €5.50. Now, if you're distributing your beer and you do not see them back, it's just like throwing €4 out of the window all the time. So it's basically burning money. So the challenge was, okay, that's not going to work for us. And plus, we cannot approach a store owner and tell them, okay, look, hey, we're here, we're the new guys, and actually, can you please change your deposit system? We want to have €5. No. So we actually, let me grab a box. When we started brewing in Denmark, they had cardboard boxes to start with, and we got cheap ones initially, which also was a pain in the ass because you had to build them, have to tape them at the bottom, put the bottles in, tape them on the top, then you don't know what's in there. We thought, okay, what can we do about this? And talked to one of these manufacturers and said, okay, well, let's make them with a basically automatic bottom to fold up and put windows inside. So that's basically where we have the labels, so we can identify on one hand what's in the box. On the other hand, if with the top that you do not have to tape down, they can be reused at the stores. They can make mix packs with them. Plus, they're always going to carry home a piece of Kehrwieder, even if there's not a single bottle of us in there. So that was that approach. Also, getting into the market is a huge challenge, especially in the German market. It's dominated on the restaurant scene. You might have noticed that most restaurants or bars have one beer. They have one Pilsner, one Hefeweizen, and maybe one non-alcoholic beer. That's because they're all getting paid by the breweries. That's a contract system. They get a certain amount of money. In return, they sign up for only selling their beers, which led to the point that the breweries killed their own market base, because if you don't have a variety, you don't care about your product anymore. You don't talk about your product, you just drink what's on tap. But nobody would go to a restaurant or a bar just because it has a Astra sign or a Beck's sign over the door. I'm going there because it's around the corner, because it has a nice atmosphere, it's the kind of food I want to eat. So they got people to just stop thinking about the beer. And that's nice. It was a challenge initially because, again, as a small brewery, we're not paying any bars to stock our beer. We're not paying any retailers to stock our beer. Plus, our beer is typically easily twice as expensive as the TV beers, the mass market beers. But slowly but surely, you can break into the market just because you're talking about flavor. That was good for the start, but since we were coming from the technical side, we didn't start with a well thought out marketing plan and a corporate CI and all of that. So basically produced the beer, and then it was like, oh yeah, well, it needs a label, huh? All right. So we put something on it with no real strategy. And after the first 2 years, we were like, okay, we should do something about it because it's not really stringent. People cannot really identify this beer as, oh, this comes from Kehrwieder or that comes from Kehrwieder, because they might be totally different. By coincidence, we met by now a good friend and artist who has his and gallery owner. It's just around the corner in Becker Breiter Gang. A guy's called Jörg Heikhaus. His artist name is Alex Diamond. And the gallery is the Helium Cowboy Art Space. I have some of the flyers or stickers there in the front of our artist beer, which I talk about in a while, which also has the gallery address on it. It's really worth going there. It's great art. So anyways, we got together because he was interested in craft beer. I like his art a lot. And so we started out initially with a special label for just a one-off production, and then he made a t-shirt for us. And after a while we sat down over a beer or 10, and we basically said, well, we really have to do something about our labels one day. And he's like, well, if you like to, I can give you a draft. And we were like, whoa, really? I mean, we never thought about asking you because you're an artist and well paid, and we couldn't afford you. It's like, no, it would be a fun project for me. Just give me some beer. But, all right. That sounds like a deal. However, it was a very, very different approach because he said, well, one thing you have to keep in mind. I'm not a designer. I'm an artist. So I'm going to give you a draft, and if you say you don't like it, it's fine with me. But I'm not going to change it. You like it, or you leave it. So for me, it was a little bit like, I don't know, my daughters are not at that age yet. The older one is 12. I was imagining at that time, it's like, probably when she's coming home with her first boyfriend and letting them go out, that's probably the same feeling, to give your beers away. It's like, okay, put something on it, and I hope it's going to work out. And I think it worked out very nicely. I think some of you have seen the bottles, and it's on the boxes as well. So all of that is basically made as woodcuts, as the original. It's not made on the computer. It's really a woodcut in the original. We did the coloring of the labels later on the computer. So that was kind of a breakthrough for us as well, and a great collaboration. Out of that, we started 2 years ago the first artist beer. The flyer that you can see there is now from the second edition. So we started out again with Jörg. He came around with the idea to work together with an artist and try to interpret the art in liquid form, which was an interesting approach. And as I said, I like the challenges and like to take things from a different angle. So it was, okay, what's the approach of his art? What is he about? What is Alex Diamond about? And that is basically kind of a workman's class hero art style. He's working a lot with wood. His philosophy is always get your hands dirty. So we basically said, okay, it has to be like an old workman style beer, having that kind of pre-industrialization or just around that time look and feel to it. So that first one was a smoked porter. So porter, the old British workman beer style, smoked to have that kind of industrial kind of steam engine feel to it. And we aged it on wood chips to have that because he's working so much with wood. Put that into boxes of 6, and each box had a signed and numbered print of that. He made a picture for that in the box. So this version now is the so-called the Love Me or Die. That's inspired by by a blues song by the artist C.W. Stone King, which is about a voodoo charm. His love for a certain girl is not being responded, so he seeks the help of a voodoo charm, puts it under her doorstep, and the voodoo charm is supposed to either make her fall in love with him or die. The song has a sad ending. However, so the approach was to create a beer taking up that spirit without the ending. hopefully. So again, we said, okay, how can we put this spirit into a beer? So we said, okay, it has to, if it's about making somebody to fall in love with someone, it has to be something teasing. It has to be something sweetish, but in a way deceiving. So high alcohol. Made a high alcohol Belgian style triple and put a lot of ingredients in there that are said to be or rumored to be aphrodisiac. So it has ginger in there, aniseed, and tonka sugar. And that greets you initially, that sweetness of the tonka. But then we also added wormwood, vermouth, the herb for vermouth, which gives you that pretty intense bitterness. So this beer starts with that sweetness. It's just teasing you in your mouth. And it's like, oh, well, that's nice. And then this bitterness comes in. It's like, oh, okay. And it has another side as well. So this is a fun project. This is really what for me is brewing about. I mean, of course, it's an art to brew Prototyp over and over again to the same standards and the same quality. But the interesting part in the art and craft of brewing is really to play around and try something new. One of my greatest inspirations is always to work with other people from other trades, like artists. We've done some coffee beers with roasters here in Hamburg. Also, the easy approach would be to brew a stout, which is a dark beer which already has some sort of coffee flavor to it from the malt, which is okay. That's the easy part. We did a lot of light-colored beers, so where it's a bit more difficult to include the coffee flavor, so that it's not fighting each other. But again, that's fun. Or when we're doing beer tastings, it's always great to talk with chefs, because chefs might not have much knowledge about beer, but they know flavor. And it's really, really great to talk to them, because once you taste the beers, their flavor machinery starts working, and that again gives a lot of inspiration for me to take it from there and it's like, well, okay, that's how ideas start. I have basically my little black book, because every time I have ideas, I just scribble it down, and they might not be ready yet. Some of the ideas I've been carrying around for years, and sometimes you just need that spark or that missing piece that comes up. And the UNN, which stands for über normal null, which is basically above sea level or above standard zero, I had this idea for quite a while because, well, roughly speaking, why are there so many IPAs out there? Because it's pretty easy to get an okay IPA right, because you dump in a lot of hops. So even if they have some defects in the beer, the hops cover it up. I don't know, it's kind of a bad mouthing, but it's still that's how it works. To make an outstanding IPA is a different story. But for home brewers, start with an IPA; it'll be drinkable for sure. So out of a joke, I said, well, that could be possible with a non-alcoholic beer, because they all taste like crap. You know, it's really, you know, you want to be the good guy or good person because you have to drive or still have to work. I personally, when I'm the driver, I'm always challenged because, well, I don't like to drink sodas all night because they're sticky and sweet, and it's just like, water again, it's just like, oh, it's boring. Or to drink like, sit around for hours and just drink water. But the traditional non-alcoholic beers are rather a punishment than basically something good, because hey, you're not drinking, right? So that was the idea. And again, a collaboration project kicked it off, because I had this idea for the longest time, and just came around the traditionally you cannot, there are two ways to produce non-alcoholic beers, either to remove the alcohol or stop the yeast from producing it. And I came across a yeast that actually stops by itself. It has basically a defect. It's always a kind of a lactose intolerant yeast. So it's maltose intolerant. It cannot process maltose, which is the main sugar that you get from your mash. So it's just not producing alcohol, but it stays alive. And a collaboration project with Geberit. They're doing, I don't know, all kind of porcelain sinks and toilet bowls and stuff like that. They, for 2 years ago, they started an art project with, again, Alex Diamond, who made the labels, and asked us to do the beers. And then they came around and was like, well, can we have a non-alcoholic beer as well? I was like, ooh. All right, okay, well, then it's time to start it off. And as a brewer, I think I'm confident enough that I can get my beers, when I have an idea for a recipe, I can get it pretty close to where I want to get it. But there's always like a 10% question mark behind it. And it was with the Prototyp, and same with the UNN, when you pull a beer from the tank for the first time and you notice, oh, this is awesome. It was not good, it's just awesome. That's really amazing and really rewarding. And it's actually, so this is how it started. And I wasn't sure how it will be received on the market, because again, so many traditional beer drinkers like, no, you don't, beer has to have alcohol. We just talked about it, Rachel. And I think I'm not drinking beer because I want to get shit-faced. I'm drinking beer because it's the flavor that I like. If I want to get shit-faced, I can buy vodka. It's cheaper and works faster. So now there's a beer out there that is that you can drink because you want to and not because you have to. Interestingly enough, we were the first one in Germany to start with that. By now there are 10, 15 different. I don't want to say copycats. It's the greatest reward that you can get if somebody's copying your product, because obviously you weren't wrong. So starting a trend with that. I think I just jumped more or less to the end because we're running out of time. So I touched that point of collaborations, which I think is always great, and it's great, especially in the craft beer scene, because that's different to many other scenes. We're working a lot together. We're sharing a lot. Collaboration brews. We're working with a brewery from Ürige, from Düsseldorf, once a year. 3-4 different breweries. So either they come to our place, or we go into their place. You're having fun with friends, and you learn, and you produce a product, and you're promoting your brands in the different areas, which is pretty unique in the craft beer scene so far. And again, this great learning experience. Because you're getting out of your traditional boundaries, you see something from the outside, how other people are doing it. Plus you can produce something new together. Just a short side story on that one. The collaboration brew with Ürige, which is like the alt beer brewery. If you talk alt beer, it is Ürige. They basically own it. And we always wanted to do beer together. And they initially said, well, why don't we make it like a pale ale? I was like, no. Ürige is alt beer. We have to stay in this alt beer universe. And all of a sudden we came, when we presented our wet hop pale ale that we do with another brewery, I met the brewmaster of Ürige, and I was like, hey, you got to try this. This is good. He's like, oh yeah, that would be the idea. Let's make a wet hop alt beer. That's how you come up with something new, and again with a very traditional style. And it's great brewing with them because they have a very, very old style brewery, and that is really, really great about the craft beer scene, which is not in the traditional beer scene. Everybody is like, oh no, I'm not telling you, this is our special yeast. Like, no, we're using a standard yeast that everybody else is using. So always trying to make something special about it, but they cannot come up with why it's special. I think I'll wrap it up here. I could say so much more, but I should stop in about 1 minute and 10. Plus, we still should have time for Q&A. So for now, I thank you for listening to all I had to say. Happy to hear all of your questions. And as I said, have a beer. You can have it here. Or you can take it home as well. Thank you so much.